Now, I'm going to start this video out seemingly way off topic and talk for a moment about professional athletes of all things, but trust me when I say this will be very relevant to the topic if you just give me a minute to explain. Anyway, it's about something even if you're an avid sports fan who's watched, I don't know, maybe thousands of games in your life, you may have never realized, noticed, or just given any real thought to, despite how many times you've probably heard it talked about. And it's something the late comedian George Carlin used to, shall we say, poke a little fun at. And if you've never heard of him, I'd only suggest looking him up if you're not easily offended. And if you're both easily offended and very religious, you're probably not going to like me referencing something he used to talk about here and using it as an example. But hopefully you'll understand I'm only using it to try and make a point and not being malicious, even though nowadays we usually just assume the worst out of people, which will kind of be the point of this video. Anyway, have you ever noticed how in professional sports athletes who win have a tendency to thank God for helping them win, or give him all the glory for the victory? But when they lose, they always talk about their own faults and failures, or blame themselves or come up with some other reason why they lost the game that doesn't involve God simply favoring the other team that day. I mean, have you ever in your entire life heard a player say we couldn't win the game because God was on the side of the other team? Even though, in theory, if you believe God helps you win some games, you'd pretty much have to come to the logical conclusion that when you lose, he helped the other players on the other team win. But of course, you can't blame God for losing. That would almost kind of cast him in a negative light, and you simply never do that, right? So you have to come up with another excuse for why you lost that completely excludes him. And basically the moral of the story here, if you will, is that you can't, or at least shouldn't, only believe something when it's convenient for you, or only highlight it or the parts of it that fit in with the narrative you want to tell about something. And that you shouldn't make up excuses for or ignore something that exists or comes along that doesn't fit with your beliefs or that maybe just flat out contradicts them. And right now there is this crazy belief that men simply do not like or cannot handle or just are rejecting based solely on gender strong female characters in movies, and especially when they're inserted into franchises that have been enjoyed predominantly, though not exclusively, by men. And one of the prime examples of this that some will point to as proof is of course Rey in the new Star Wars sequels, and they'll say the dislike for her is only coming from misogynist men and has nothing to do with perhaps her just being a poorly realized character. And these same people will then also have to ignore the fact that Leia, easily one of the greatest strong female characters in the history of film, also happens to be one of the most beloved and popular characters in the entire Star Wars franchise. And you'd be very, very hard-pressed to find any male fan out there who would have anything bad to say about her character, outside of her Mary Poppins incident in The Last Jedi, of course, which had nothing to do with the character itself and was just a silly idea, and let's try and forget that ever happened. Anyway, you simply can't acknowledge that the same male fans who dislike Rey also love Leia because that doesn't compute or fit with the narrative. I mean, how can you love one strong female character in a franchise but not another, unless maybe it's not the gender of the character but something else entirely? If you want to dig a little deeper into the Star Wars franchise, you'll find the expanded universe, now called Legends, is chocked full of amazing female characters that, in all my years of following it, I never heard one single gripe about, because they were good, well-thought-out characters. In fact, if you ask pretty much any fan of the old EU, some of, if not most of, the best characters to come out of it were indeed female. But again, that doesn't fit with the narrative, so we simply ignore it, nor does the love in the Star Wars fanbase for the character Ahsoka Tano fit. And if you've watched enough of my videos, you've probably figured out she's one of my personal favorite characters. In fact, when you really stop and look at it, the only female characters that seem to get any flack at all from fans were all featured in The Last Jedi, those of course being Rey, Rose, and Holdo. It's almost as if, well, I don't know, some fans really just didn't like that movie and those characters. And I know this is where some will want to bring up all the hate Kelly Marie Tran, who of course played Rose, got on social media and use that as some type of proof that everyone who hates The Last Jedi is a terrible person and should be condemned, which is the most ridiculous thing ever. Because here's the thing, I didn't like The Last Jedi. I also didn't very much care for the character of Rose. But I never sent her any hate on social media, nor did a vast, vast majority of the other fans who didn't like the movie. And that's because, by and large, we're all pretty rational people who can separate an actor from the role that they play, and we shouldn't in any way be held responsible for what a small minority of people who have something in common with us did. I mean, think of it this way. If your next door neighbor commits a murder, is it fair for you to be arrested and convicted as well because of your close proximity to them? No. So then shouldn't we just place the blame for her harassment solely on those doing the harassing and not try to implicate a larger group of people because they may have some loose attachments to the perpetrators? After all, that kind of sounds like stereotyping to me, but hey, it's only bad when it doesn't fit your own personal narrative, right? Furthermore here, newer movies like Wonder Woman and the recently released Alita Battle Angel, not to mention older movies like Aliens, Terminator 2, and many others, really begin to shatter this belief that men won't embrace and love strong female characters. But again, acknowledging that doesn't fit or line up with the narrative, so we just ignore that and focus on the movies and characters that are getting quote-unquote hate. Because how can anyone with a preset belief about men's hatred for female characters, or maybe just women in general, ever hope to rectify, with logic anyway, that a man could love the movie Aliens, for example, and think Ripley is one of the best characters in the history of film, but then doesn't like The Last Jedi and doesn't think Rey is a good character? How can we possibly make that person out to be sexist unless we only focus on the evidence that fits our narrative and ignores everything else? And therein lies one of the biggest problems with the world today, ignoring the facts or evidence we don't like and taking things out of context to push a narrative that fits our agenda. And the crazy, or maybe just the sad part about it all, is the more you push an agenda and base it off half-truths or just flat-out lies or misinformation, the more pushback and rejection you're going to get from the side you're attacking or trying to prove wrong, because they obviously don't want misinformation spread about them or to be misrepresented, which of course then gets used as evidence against them to affirm those initial complaints levied against them. For example here, if I say I don't like the character of Rey, and you counter by saying it's because you're a misogynist, I'm going to defend myself and stress I just don't like the character and that I have no problem with her being a woman. If you then say, well, fans who didn't like the movie are harassing Daisy Ridley on Twitter, and since you don't like the movie, you must hate Daisy Ridley too, well, I'm going to defend myself and say, no, that's not the case. If you then come at me again and keep insisting over and over that I must hate Rey and there couldn't possibly be anything wrong with the character or the movie itself that she was in, well, eventually, even the calmest person is going to get tired of it, and they're going to get angry, and they're going to snap back. And when you do that, when you get angry, then they use that as evidence that you've just been an angry, irrational woman hater all along, even though you've been provoked. And don't get me wrong here. Are there some men out there who hate female characters or just women in general? Absolutely. Of course there are. Do they make up anywhere near the majority of men who didn't like Rey or The Last Jedi? Absolutely not. Most men who don't like her, hell, most people, men or women, who didn't like her just didn't think she's a good character. And guess what? That's okay. And it doesn't say anything about them as a person if they don't like Rey, beyond them just not liking one character in a series of movies. And the even crazier part about all of this is making enemies out of potential allies, if you will. Because if I were president of Lucasfilm, and I was in a meeting a few years back now discussing what to do with the sequel trilogy, and someone in that room said to me, you know what, both the prequels and the original trilogy only really had one main female character, those being Padme and Leia respectively. And I really think we should try to get a few more female characters into the mix, and maybe even make our new main character a woman. You know what? I probably, and any other Star Wars fan out there, would have nodded in agreement and said, yeah, that's a good idea. However, I would have stressed that we still have to put a good story first, and we can't or shouldn't make the movie itself and or the ad campaign or anything we executives say about the fact that we're running a female lead here. Instead, we should make it feel like her place in the story is completely organic, that the decision to make our new lead female was actually a secondary one, or even an afterthought, one that really didn't matter because, yeah, of course a woman can be a powerful Jedi. Hell, there are already other examples of them within the canon, so why would we make a big deal out of this? Because the thing is, the more we try to put her on a pedestal, the more we say the point of the trilogy is about her being a strong woman, and seemingly not about the actual story, the larger problem we're likely going to have with fans who wouldn't have cared about her being a female in the first place if we would have just done it without all the hype around it. And if they just focused on telling a great story and not making any sort of point about her being a woman, do you really think it would be a big deal right now? Though to be fair and completely honest here, the movies themselves never really make a big deal out of Rey being a female. In other words, there is no overt moment where Rey says something that she can do it just because she's a girl. The story itself is really not about her being female. However, the big deal made about it outside of the movies seems to have impacted what they will or won't do with the character within the story. And whether that's true or not, I suppose can be debated, but it's certainly the impression many people get. And finally here we come to Captain Marvel, which has become like the ultimate battleground movie, and at the time of making this video, it hasn't even come out yet. And look, I know it's hard for some people out there to believe this, but a vast majority of men not only don't really care if strong female characters get more screen time, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but they actually like and embrace the idea because they love those type of characters. Believe it or not, a lot of the time men will even gravitate more towards a good female character over a male one. And the reason why Captain Marvel is getting so much pushback before it even comes out is because for many male fans, this has been the breaking point. They're tired of being told they're misogynists and that they reject and hate all female characters when there's plenty of evidence out there to the contrary that simply gets ignored. People not only hate being told how to think, but they also hate someone trying to tell them how they're already thinking, especially when it's way off base. It might not seem fair or right to you personally, or how it should even be, but the harder you push strong female characters, or any agenda for that matter, the more rejection of them you're ultimately going to get. Not because people are against them, but because they don't want to watch movies where pushing them feels like the point of the movie. And you can say, well, these movies aren't for them anyway. Problem is, these movies are in a franchise that they are already huge fans of and have been for many, many years. And as a company interested in making money, is that really the message you want to send? Do you really want to tell Star Wars fans that a Star Wars movie isn't for all fans anymore? That sounds like the perfect way to not only destroy your franchise, but to also get the message you want to send utterly rejected. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about all this. Is pushing female characters just causing more harm than good? Or are male fans really just women haters who can't stand strong female characters despite all the evidence to the contrary? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and until next time, thanks for watching.